All right, so last night, Richardson Hitchens, like he beat the living crap out of George Kambosos. Let's be real. Um, I feel bad on Richardson Hitchens because I'm not really going to talk too much about him. Although I think that Hitchens is a decent fighter, very much a decent fighter. Beat Liam Parrow for the IBF title at 140 pounds. He's looked decent. He's looked decent without ever really setting the world alight. Well, he definitely set the world alight last night, but I went into this fight with I never truly believed George Kambosos would have a shot at this fight, and I hate to. I don't want to sound like I'm being harsh on George Kambosos because ferocious is his nickname, and he is a ferocious guy. He's not someone who's gonna. He's not someone who's gonna look for the exit. He's not gonna do a William Skull and run around the ring and then be happy I went 12 rounds. He's not gonna do that. He's always gonna come and he's always gonna give it his all. And I guess at the end of the day, that's all you can really ask of a fighter. But the fact of the matter is that this is a guy who. The first time I ever seen George Kambosos Jr. was on the Chisora Usyk undercard. He fought Lee Selby. Former IBF featherweight champion. Obviously, it was at lightweight. Now, again, I hadn't heard of Kambosos. Knew he was undefeated going into that fight, and he was the winner. He was a clear winner, although Lee Selby had his moments. I remember at the time that show was on Sky Sports, but it was also shown on DAZN. It was before Eddie Hearn did the exclusive deal with DAZN. So you had the Sky Sports or you had DAZN, and obviously with DAZN it's pretty much the team we have now, with the exception of Ade, obviously. It's pretty much the team we have now. You had, I think, Barker might have been on comms. I know Andy Lee was. And Andy Lee, who is not the greatest scorer of fights, to be fair. I've always kind of looked at his scorecards in the past and been like, what the hell? He had Lee Selby winning. And I couldn't really make a case for Selby winning the fight, but Kambosos didn't set the world alight. Alright, he didn't do that. And then it was announced after that fight he was mandatory for the IBF. Now, the IBF title at the time was one of many titles held by Teofimo Lopez. He had, I think, only I can't remember the time, it was around about October, November in 2020 when he'd beaten Vasily Lomachenko. So he had all those titles, or at the very least he had the IBF, because I knew he won. That was the title he won prior to fighting Lomachenko. So I remember looking at that thinking, oh, okay, he's a mandatory, so it has to happen. But he's never going to beat Teofimo Lopez. That time Teo was the takeover. He was always looking good. He was always looking decent. And I remember thinking, okay, he's not going to beat Teofimo Lopez. I think the fight was rescheduled at least twice. It was meant to happen, I think, mid-21 and then kind of summer 21, or it ultimately ended up happening in November 2021. And again, I hope I don't come across as being, a bit of a you-know-what to Kambosos, because that's not my intention. But realistically that night, it was a real case of the perfect moment. It was, you could not have probably got a worse version of Teofimo Lopez. That version of Teofimo Lopez, I'm telling you now, if he had turned up against someone like a Barbosa Jr., if he had turned up against Loma, he probably would have got stopped. If he'd have turned up against whoever, anyone with a decent amount of ability, which Kambosos definitely has, then he would have got annihilated. It was competitive. He was down Teofimo in the first round. He dropped George Kambosos in round number 10. But ultimately, Kambosos had done enough to win. And that performance, again, we have to take it in context. Lopez was not himself. He had some health issues. I think he had some personal issues going on as well. His dad was a complete joke of a corner man that night. He gave him no sound advice whatsoever when it was clear he needed good advice because they had no game plan. So again, as I said, everything just kind of fell into place that night. And ultimately, it left a lot of people really overrating. Don't want to call it overrating. A lot of people did rate him quite highly after that. And you still what was the guy's name? Mickey Bay and the Lee Selby performances, they were kind of meh. And it was a competitive fight against Teofimo Lopez. He won it, but you're like, it wasn't, it wasn't like he went in there and just dominated. He certainly didn't do that. So when it was announced he was fighting Devin Haney, I was like, oh, Haney should win this. should win this soundly, outbox him, and he did. And then he won the rematch. So it showed kind of where Kambosos was at, and we were kind of like, all right, well, what are we going to deal with now? He then drops down a level, fights Maxi Hughes, who, don't let his record fool you, he's better than that record suggests. I think it's 5 losses, or it ended up, I think it's 6 losses now, but 6 or 7 losses now actually, because officially he lost the George Kambosos fight. But in reality, that fight was a complete joke of a score. It was clear to me Maxi Hughes won the fight, and again, Maxi Hughes is a kind of fringe world level fighter, and he soundly beat George Kambosos Jr. He just didn't get the decision. So again, that kind of puts in context where he's at in his respective career with regards, the level he's at. He then, off the back of that, gets a fight with a living legend in Vasily Lomachenko, who's way more aggressive than the likes of, Teofimo was aggressive that night, but Loma is just much better with his aggression when he's on form, and he was that night. And he beat the living crap out of George Kambosos. He beat him black and blue. Kambosos comes back this year, back in March, the same day the legendary George Foreman passed away. I remember that morning very well. Saturday morning, I remember very well. He fights, I think is his name, Jack Wiley. Short notice guy coming in, debut at 140 pounds. I thought he looked awful. Campbell, I thought he really looked awful. So when this fight was announced, I was like, yikes. I can't see it. I can't see him doing well in this fight. And subsequently, the performance last night showed that. I think Kambosos is still living 4 years later off that win over Teofimo Lopez. And as I said in this video, I think that particular night the stars really did align for him, and now he's shown us where he's at, which is kind of fringe world level. When you're just scraping by a Lee Selby, when people like Gustav Lemon, I think it's how you say his name, I think Gustav Lemon stopped him in a couple of rounds, that kind of puts it in context. He's very small for 140 pounds, so it's not the correct weight. He's never even the biggest lightweight, to be honest with you. So for me, I think that I personally wouldn't like to see Kambosos carry on, maybe have a one last farewell fight in Australia. But for me, I think that enough is enough. He's starting to take beatings now. He's getting stopped. He was stopped in the 8th round brutally with a body shot. And yeah, for me, I don't want to, again, I hope I don't come across as being overtly harsh on him in this video, but I can only say what I'm seeing, and over the last few years that's what's been happening and that's what we've seen. So Richardson Hitchens marches on. I haven't really talked about the fight, to be honest. There's not really much to talk about. Richardson Hitchens marches on. Kambosos, I don't know. I really don't know. He's been well paid. I think again he's one of those fighters who has made more money than his skill set. He's an overachiever, best way to say it. Made more money and achieved more than he probably should have done in the sport of boxing. That's not a bad thing. It's always a good thing to say that about people, because it means they've made money, they've won titles, when in reality they probably should never have even done any of that. So you beat the game. You played it at the highest difficulty, and you looked into it. Element of luck there, there's always element of luck there, and you got it. So credit to him for that, if nothing else. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you could, smash the like button, hit subscribe. Until next time, peace.